This is Twit.
AMD CPU news that is not Ryzen 3000 news. AMD EPYC 7002 series Rome. This thing is kind of a beast. And when I say kind of, I mean, holy crap, look at the size of this thing. If you go over to servethehome.com, they have the launch of the AMD EPYC 7002 series. And Patrick Kennedy notes the last two, quote, I should say, quote, the last two-digit represented is the second generation product, formerly codenamed Rome. And this is, as Mr. Kennedy notes, something that everybody on the planet has been looking forward to. Quote, vendors, customers, ISVs, even teams designing hardware for future space missions. There is a common theme, giddiness over Rome. What, I mean, you know, this is, people get excited about processors. People occasionally even get excited about servers. Mr. Kennedy is, like the people he's discussing in this article, absolutely giddy about this one. And, you know, it's pretty crazy, right? There's 19 parts from 8 cores to 64 cores. The largest parts, the 64-core parts, are running something in the neighborhood of 32 billion transistors, which is to say significantly more transistors than even the most complicated GPUs right now. The I/O die is the center of the server. Quote, this chip is the first step in disaggregating compute, memory, storage, and other I/O and servers. And other vendors, i.e. Big Blue, will follow this paradigm shift. The CPU core is no longer the center of the server, which is a more modern systems approach. Twice the performance per socket in mainstream applications as Intel has throughout the range up to the Xeon Platinum. Man, PCI Gen 4, Intel still at PCI Gen 3. That means you're talking about AMD's EPYC 7002 having twice the bandwidth per lane. I mean, it gets crazy. If you have to move staggering amounts of data and process the information, this is a big deal. And I don't think Intel is remotely ready with a response to this.
No, and they're behind on desktop. Obviously, they've had some rather well publicized issues with 10 nanometer, and typically the server side of things has been about a generation behind desktop with Intel. So you're still dealing with some kind of aging Xeon parts on Intel's side until they come out with their new products. And we're going to see 10 nanometer on desktop, I assume, by the end of this. I think it's the beginning of next year. I know we have mobile parts coming as early as, I think, the end of this month with Ice Lake. But then desktop is the next year thing. And then I assume at some point they're going to have to do something. It's whether or not they're competing on price, if there are price drops across the board. And one of those things that I don't fully understand because I'm not on that side of things is like list price, tray price versus what is actually being charged by Intel when they're selling these servers, because they're often selling complete servers. They're not necessarily just selling chips, or they might be selling in massive quantities to system integrators like the actual manufacturers of these servers. One of the really interesting things about this EPYC 2 launch is, or this is, I guess this is EPYC 3, since they've gone from Zen to Zen Plus to now Zen 2, like we saw with desktop. But they brought a lot of partners on stage. They were showing a lot of strength where when first generation EPYC came out, they did not have that. They announced it, it looked great, had some significant advantages over what Intel had at the time, but nobody was really calling, and they didn't have like, you know, these partnerships, which are very valuable on the server side, because it's not quite like the enthusiast side where you're going out and parting it all out. Although, of course, we said that last night, and then immediately a Newegg listing for the top end part showed up, which shows out of stock. But I mean, the same thing happened with that crazy Intel 56 core part. That then showed up on Newegg for like $3,300 the next day. But just to get an idea of what this launch means, and page 7 and 8 of this massive Serve the Home review, and they had the product ahead of time, and they were doing some benchmarking against their Intel systems. And they do a lot of server specific workloads, of course. It's Serve the Home, and significantly faster CPU performance, of course, when you're talking about multi-threaded applications. But just in general, just the performance boost, single and multi-thread, is phenomenal. And one of the most impressive things about this is what they're doing with power consumption, because as exciting as it is to see huge wins in performance, at the end of the day, what is the total cost of ownership of this? And they're talking like 50+% lower total cost of ownership versus similar performing Intel systems. And I think it's page 9 that has a nice chart there. Yeah. Because Xeon, not even the top end Xeon Platinum 8280, max observed power draw is somewhere around 425, 430 watts, if I'm looking at this chart correctly. And then EPYC, and then of course the 9200 Platinum is the high end part. EPYC, the 7742, is under 350 watts. So it's a big drop in total power for a significantly more powerful platform. So it's on multiple levels. You're getting more performance per watt, and it's significantly lower wattage as well, which makes obviously a huge difference when you're scaling this up to many multiple instances, and you're going across multi-socketed platforms, because they're focusing on single and of course multi-socket here, but they're doing things that Intel just can't do, which is obviously they're on 7 nanometer. They have the power savings, a much improved CPU architecture as we've seen on the desktop side, and then they have 128 lanes of PCIe 4.0. And as if, I mean, they could get by with 64 lanes of similar performance. If you look at what 4.0 can actually do on the server side, you could basically take existing Gen 3 by 4 and move it down to 2 lanes of PCIe 4. There's a lot you can do, but they've created a product with a tremendous amount of expandability. And by jumping to 4th gen, they're just so far, like the lead just seems almost insurmountable at this point. So it'll be very interesting to see what Intel comes out with. But right now, Intel absolutely dominant on the server side, 90+% market share. So if this erodes that, and they continue making inroads on the desktop side, at least with enthusiasts. I mean, enthusiast sales of Ryzen parts has been very strong. I've seen some speculation that it's up to about 60% of desktop processors sold in the last quarter might have been the new Ryzen parts, if you're looking at just Ryzen versus 9th gen Intel stuff, the current stuff on desktop. But Intel, we won't get into this, but Intel still dominates on mobile, and they have been dominating on the server side. So I'm very curious to see what the landscape looks like in a year's time with these out there in force.
I think the $64,000 question here is how well positioned AMD is to take advantage of this. Patrick Kennedy, who's been running Serve the Home for a long time, is in a position to have talked to a lot of people, talked to a lot of vendors, talked to a lot of possible consumers, and they seem incredibly interested in moving to this part. And if AMD can take advantage of the simple fact that they have a vastly superior product in terms of performance or potential performance, that's a huge opportunity. And it's something at the very least it should put Intel in a position where they have to reduce the cost of their server parts to their clients or to their customers to be more competitive with this. I'm really curious to see how this rolls out, to say the very least on that one. It's it's a pretty serious opportunity for AMD. And I mean the specs though, I'm side-eyeing here looking at them again, and it's just the new architecture is kind of fascinating. The number of lanes, the bandwidth on the lanes. This is something that people dealing with big data have to be, well, as Mr. Kennedy describes, they are pretty much giddy and looking forward to this.